I don't really get to say that yoga isn't enough. It is perfect as it is.
The big question is this: how do we take a seemingly ordinary world and make it beyond extraordinary? In yoga, there is so much more than meets the eye, and it's not just the things we do on our yoga mats that make the biggest difference. That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answer. My name is Austin Bitsis, and welcome to Life as a Secret Yogi. Welcome everybody, this is your host Austin Bitsis, and I just want to take a moment to redefine what a secret yogi truly is. It is something we embody at our source after we peel away those layers of our thoughts, of our emotions, of the physical sensations, and our ego. It is our true self. It is a secret, quote, quote, because we do this unknown to others when we are off our yoga mats. This is what makes us live at a frequency in which we can connect with the world around us. We are able to feel oneness, and yoga physically, it helps us relieve and heal the physical sensation that pull our bodies from its true form. It helps us overcome the physical sensations that distract our minds and therefore influence our actions. Yoga helps us non-physically by first becoming aware of the layers that enwrap us and block us from our internal source. By becoming aware, we can then become more mindful of these layers, such as our thoughts, our emotions, and our ego, and in return become master of these and letting us create the space in our lives and get to our true source. In a perfect world, this would be super easy, right? We'd all live in this beautiful utopia with the birds singing and the sun always shining. However, we all know that this is a journey. The only thing we can influence is the now, the present moment, and giving it our full awareness and attention, and therefore our full energy. On this show, we discuss the journey. We discuss that there are no single solutions, but many solutions to overcome these layers that bind our eternal source from shining. Yoga and meditation is a practice to be done consistently and to be adapted to our own unique layers. It is universal and has been so immensely useful for so many different types of people, from athletes to artists to entrepreneurs to parents. Explore and listen and utilize the stories that we share on this podcast, reflect on them, and utilize the resources of other secret yogis, which they use to bring awareness, because sometimes all it takes is one thing done consistently that makes the biggest difference. So on today's episode, we have Jules Mitchell. She is a traditional yoga practitioner, and that's really been her audience. But I really wanted to get her on the show to just speak with her about her life as a secret yogi, as we just defined. She is widely known around the yoga community for her works in biomechanics. If you don't know what biomechanics is, it is the science of movement of the living body, including how our muscles, our bones, our tendons, and our ligaments work together to produce movement. However, I warn you, we don't dive right into this and we don't really touch on this too much in this episode. She has a lot of amazing information out there on this if you're interested. But in this podcast, I was more interested in her life as a secret yogi, as I mentioned. How personally she came to find yoga and what tools she was utilizing to make life beautiful. In this show, in the show notes below, I broke this episode into two sections, so feel free to skip around. In section 1, we recognize what is happening around us in the world and how our world has shifted and how our businesses have shifted to this virtual reality. In part 2, it is more traditional Life as a Secret Yogi fashion, and we discuss Jules' beginning to finding yoga, her entrepreneurship, and becoming an author. We discuss any tips she might have for those in their own yoga journey. We discuss and debate, and make sure to listen and form your own opinions based on the questions we discuss. But before we jump in, a section called I Wish We Were Sponsored By. So today's episode is brought to you by Vivo Barefoot. Vivo Barefoot has been our sponsor in the past, And that's because I really believe in their products and I'm a super fan of theirs. So as you all know, I'm absolute diehard fan and think they're doing an amazing job in the yoga and movement community by coming up with these stylish minimalist shoes. I'll provide a link in the show notes below. If this is your first time ordering, I have a special deal for you, which you can save $30 off on your order of $130 or more, which is a lot better than their 10% listed on their site. Just make sure to use the affiliate link below and the promo code AustinBitsis at checkout. So check them out at vivobarefoot.com using the link below. And as always, you don't have to, but of course, when you use the affiliate link below, it is greatly appreciated because all the proceeds go directly back into supporting the show. So without further ado, enjoy this episode with Jules Mitchell. For all who don't know Jules Mitchell, she's an incredible yoga teacher and yoga practitioner, and she's really immersed herself in this world of biomechanics. In Jules' system, she fuses traditional yoga with the latest biomechanics and exercise science research, which she could tell us more about. And she brings this clarity to how and why we practice asana or the yoga poses. And she also works as a yoga consultant for various research studies. And she is an awesome entrepreneur, authoring her latest book, Yoga Biomechanics, Stretching Redefined. And it really teaches us about biomechanics and gives us a full, comprehensive look into it. She teaches also workshops, teacher trainings, and you do a lot, Jules. So
I do.
So I really appreciate you coming on to the show. And I want to start off this episode a little different than kind of how we normally start off some of these episodes, just kind of to recognize what's going on today. And I know from some of your latest posts, from following you on Instagram, life has really become virtual. And like we were just talking about a second ago, our lives and some of our businesses, like your business, has really been thrown a kind of like a wild card.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really became this virtual reality, almost like this video game. And it makes us feel like life is living behind a computer screen or our phones.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes you want to just become a kid again when things were simpler. So out of all this, what positives have you kind of seen in all this? Like looking at the optimistic viewpoint.
That's really funny. Last weekend, my sister was in town because she was helping me with my teacher training, which is my sister. She ended up not helping at all and being more work, but that's another story. But we were kind of having like a relaxing day by the pool after the training was done. And she was like, all right, everyone, like, it was a small group of us, like, what, positives out of COVID. And I couldn't come up with one. So that's funny. That's your first question. I'm like, I've been thinking about that for a couple of weeks now, it feels like, and I'm getting nowhere. I guess I could come up with a positive. I had moved into a new home, like literally the week of shutdown. And in between I was in Switzerland teaching, and then I was going to the UK teaching, and then I came home for 3 days to move into a new house. And when I got back from the UK, everybody went into shelter in place. And so I guess the benefit of that is that I really have had a chance to like get settled, which I never would have been able to do. I would have been still living out of boxes. And that's kind of been my life, living out of boxes, living out of suitcases. And so I have really had a chance to like be settled and rooted, which I have not had probably since 2015. I've been really unsettled. I've moved like 6 times and lived in my sister's basement. So I've been completely not rooted. And now I'm the exact opposite. I'm about as rooted as it gets. Everything keeps getting canceled. So I'm like, okay, another month at home.
Yeah.
But it is nice. It's different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, for everybody, I feel like it's different. And maybe looking back on it, we might have unseen kind of positives come out of this, even though right now it doesn't seem that way for a lot of us. So that's great that you kind of found something to kind of.
I mean, it does feel good to be rooted, I have to say. Like that was, I think I was just like going. I mean, really coming home for a couple of days at a time. I was on so many planes. And I think I just I just was kind of living at like a high level of like anxiety and kind of packing planning type space and couldn't think things through. And now I've had a lot of time to think things through.
And for the future of yoga teaching, there really is this uncertain future. And I know a recent post of yours, you mentioned that you're not sure if some of the trainings in the fall will be in person, virtual, or really they canceled altogether. And I think that goes for a lot of people, not only in yoga, but in a lot of other businesses. So you mentioned you had a big shift personally and in business compelled by different motives now. What motives are those? And from these, what are you really looking to change in the future?
That's tough because it's a little bit more nuanced because like I have so many different programs going at one time. You know what I mean? Like I had an online business before all this, and those are no problem, easy, like that, the programs that I had that were already designed for online, no big deal. But like, one of my big things was doing a teacher training, a 300-hour teacher training, not a 200-hour, but a 300-hour teacher training every year. And I had to do the first part of this year's online, and I don't know what the second part's going to look like. And if it's going to have to be online, that's really going to affect whether or not I'm going to do one next year. And if I am going to do it and it has to be online, like it has to change. A lot of it has to change. So it's more just like the nuanced details of every single individual program that I offer. And there are many, need to be looked at individually and adjusted. And then another big thing is just what's going on in the world with all of the social unrest that we're having, and looking at my business and looking at my, all white teaching faculty for my guest teacher training, and how am I going to shift so that it's more diverse without just picking someone just to satisfy diversity. That's the exact opposite of what I want to do. So now I've tasked myself with building actual real relationships with a diverse population of guest teachers that would be appropriate for my content. I still am looking in the biomechanics realm. And so that's not something that happens overnight. That's something that happened. It's a big commitment to make that I've made and shared with many of my colleagues. And we're supporting each other because they have similar commitments, and we're supporting each other and sharing resources and contacts. So that's not something I can do overnight. And that's something that takes, more than just a statement or a social media post, which is why I've not posted about it on social media, because I'm just not that way. Like I'd rather do the work and come back later and be like, this is everything I've done. So yeah, that's been really profound for me. Just kind of recognizing my privilege in academia, recognizing the just inherent exclusion in academia and science, and really looking at that. And that's just deep, hard work that doesn't get resolved with a few donations and a few book purchases and a few, different Zoom classes that I'm doing. All the little things, just in the scope of my commitment, those little things seem meaningless. I mean, still doing them all, but they're, it's just like, why talk about those little things when there's really bigger things that I need to focus on, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what you asked, but that's
no, exactly. And I think coming to that realization where it's just like, what's that one big thing, or those few big things that are kind of like the big dominoes that'll knock down all the little small dominoes that almost seem meaningless. They're not meaningless in a sense.
No, they're
of
not.
Like,
they're important.
Yeah, they're big dominoes, but at the same time, it's like, what are those big things kind of relevant to right now that will make the greatest impact, because we could only spread ourselves so thin in so many different ways.
Yeah. And like, it's just, and like, I don't know, the inclusion and diversity has always, like, I'm not suddenly shocked by it. Like I've always been aware of it, and I've always known it to be there. And, if I go back and look at even my first training and how I was already trying to be inclusive, and I didn't do it right. I didn't do it well enough. It was, I brought someone in to talk about cultural appropriation and things like that, but it wasn't the right person. And it didn't go well. So it's not like I'm like suddenly going, oh, wow, I need to do this. It's just, I've always just been kind of fumbling through it. and not really making a long-term like personal commitment. I think I have been able to do now just because the movement is right now is so powerful. Like it was always there, but it was so easy to forget about, because it was like,
Yeah. Yeah,
the
of course.
protests would happen for a day and then everything went back to how it
Hmm.
was. And so I'm just really grateful for everybody who is on social media posting about the little things, I'm using air quotes, but that aren't little. Those are actually meaningful because it keeps the momentum going, and it
Hmm.
keeps, it keeps all of us in check.
But as for your yoga journey, kind of when did that all begin? I mean, you have an online business, you have an in-person business, you're well known in the yoga community, you have your book launched. How did this all begin? And is there any particular moments that you maybe have not mentioned in past interviews and that were kind of pivotal in your journey?
My
Passion
yoga
for it.
journey began in undergrad, and I went to a class. I was in college, went to a class with a friend and in Tucson. And like it was weird. I had like a familiarity with it, like I'd been doing this before or in another life, or you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
I knew it. I already knew what it was. It was very accepting. And that was just kind of how it started. I mean, I went pretty regularly, and then I didn't go for a while, and I went pretty regular. It was just, I was 20, I didn't have a big dedicated practice really at the time, off and on, but I always came back to it because I always knew it was right for me. And then I think it was after my mom passed away that I kind of like threw myself into yoga, like, just completely threw myself into yoga, almost as a, looking back, it's like as a coping mechanism, which probably also had its problems. It was just a transference of, like dealing with one thing and then avoiding it. And now I'm like kind of becoming addicted to yoga, so to speak. But it's okay. I made my way out on the other end.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a similar journey to a lot of us where it's like we get introduction to yoga and a lot of us kind of intermittently get started in it and maybe not so consistency and then we finally feel that it's the right point in our lives where it's just
Hmm.
it really clicks and it kind of holds on to us and we kind of go down that journey into yoga, meditation, and really finding our source and finding our inner light, as I like to call it. And kind of going back to that time, was there anything you wish you did differently when you started out? Maybe in your physical practice or maybe in your non-physical practice, like in your meditation work?
No, I mean, that was the journey. It was, I couldn't really change anything. I mean, I guess the one, if I had to have to say one mistake, it's not really a mistake, but it's kind of humorous. I didn't know all too much really about like all the variety of yoga there was. Like I'd gone to pretty much like hatha school, what an Anusara school, and then like a vinyasa school. Like I kind of just, that's those styles of yoga was kind of what I knew. I was, for many years, like over a decade, I was a nightclub bartender. And so I had a really weird schedule. Like it was hard to fit yoga in because classes were generally in the morning or in the evening. And in the morning I'm sleeping, and in the evening I'm going to work. So I made it work, but it was a challenge. And so I just got online, and this was probably 15 years ago. So even more, maybe. So online isn't even what it is today, and got online and found a yoga studio, a local yoga studio that had classes like all day, like in the afternoon at 2, like really convenient times. And so I was like, oh, awesome. So I signed up for a class, and I went in my like long ankle length leggings and my like cotton tank top or whatever. And it was a Bikram class. I didn't know what Bikram was. And I walked in to the room, and it was like carpeted and mirrored and smelly and so damn hot. I was like, what's happening here? Like, I had no clue. And everyone's in bikinis. And I'm like, my clothes are like drenched and soaking through. I was so out of place. And we didn't do a single downward dog. And I was like, what is this thing? It was pretty hilarious. And then I finally left there, like my clothes were like dragging on the floor. And like I remember I went to Starbucks and got like 2 super huge iced teas, and then I had to drive home and like shower and go to work. And all night long, I was like, I'm so tired because I was so unprepared to sweat like that. Kind of funny. I mean, it didn't affect me in any negative way. It's just, it was a mistake. I didn't do my research. I just showed up because of the time.
That's funny. And for all who don't know what Bikram yoga is, it's like what, 110 degrees
Oh yeah.
for a
It gets
90-minute
hotter.
class, 26 poses. It's kind of branded as like hot yoga. It's got a bad rap in the past few years.
Yeah.
They just launched that documentary on kind of who Bikram
Yeah.
was.
30 by 30 or whatever it is. Yeah. It's good.
Yeah.
Watch it.
Yeah, no, definitely. But regardless, I mean, it's pretty intense for a yoga practice. So.
It's just hot. It's just hot and it's humid. So your only ability to cool your body is removed because sweat doesn't help. So yeah, I remember looking at my arm and being like, I didn't know I could sweat there. It was like water was pouring off of me. Anyway, it was funny.
Feels good though. Feels good. And kind of going on to into your journey. I mean, you wrote a book, Yoga Biomechanics, Stretching Redefined. It's an amazing tool for all yoga teachers and students. Like it's not just for yoga teachers. And first, I mean, just as somebody who does yoga and is now an author, for all those aspiring authors out there, and what advice do you kind of give? And this is not kind of going off topic in that sense. It's kind of utilizing the tools of maybe it was a meditation practice or utilizing the tools of yoga to kind of deal with stress, anxiety, maybe confusion you had and self-doubt. And just like quickly, like what advice would you kind of give for somebody who's working on something really hard or maybe aspiring author?
That you should write it for yourself. I mean, I wrote it for an audience, but I didn't write it for them, if that makes sense. Like I had the audience was your like stuffed animals at the tea party when you're a kid playing by yourself. Like that was my audience. You know what I mean? Like I know they represent a larger real audience, but I wasn't writing to people. I was writing to my make-believe people so that it could be for me, because there's nothing that will stop you faster than trying to write it for somebody else, because you'll hear their criticism and it'll stop you. So you just have to write it for yourself and be like, I don't care if anyone reads this. It doesn't make a difference. Like I need to get this out. I need to get these words out on paper. And it's being shared and people want to hear it. But I needed to work out the message. You know what I mean? Like I knew what the book was, but as I wrote it, it kind of changed and morphed, and like it tells a story. Like there's a story, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and there's information that leads to a bigger conclusion. And that is what I wrote. Like I wrote it to work that story out. You know, I had already been on the road teaching the content in it, but I feel like it just like now the content has like I can deliver it in a really nice, clean package that everybody can understand and make sense of. And that's what happened when I wrote the book. So it's for yourself. It's to get your own thoughts clear. Mm-hmm. Because when you speak, you can just say a bunch of words. But when you write, it's a whole different story. You have to be very deliberate with your words. That's the best part of it.
Yeah. What is that quote? Brevity is the wit of the soul. Like, that's a famous quote. It's hard to write. It's harder to kind of condense stuff. And from going through this process, has there any points of view that have shifted? I mean, I know you've been on a lot of podcasts and you wrote this book. Over those years and that transition through that journey, is there any particular points of view that have shifted?
I don't think they've shifted. Like, I don't think I've changed I did a lot of mind changing pre-book, but since book, I don't think I've done a lot of mind changing. I've just become better and more articulate at certain concepts. So I've just been, it just keeps maturing, you know. I haven't really shifted. It hasn't been long enough for me to shift. I'm still in it, you know, like even though it's done, but now I'm like out sharing the contents of the book. Like I think if I started a second book or like, you know, then I would have a much larger shift, but I'm not there yet. I'm still very much in the execution of sharing and delivering this one. You know, it's only been 18 months it's been out. So it's not old yet. It will be old next year probably, but not this year.
And did you feel that learning technique and alignment was being or not being emphasized in yoga enough. And that's just kind of one of the reasons where you wrote this book. Because I know personally, I came from a running background, a collegiate running background at a very high level. And I was taught not only from my coaches, but from like other runners and just in the community, it was pretty common knowledge, not common knowledge, but it was shared that like, oh, don't practice yoga, you're going to get hurt. And that was in high school. That was at a Division I level in college, and that was just common knowledge, and I just stayed away from it. But it was funny enough that the thing was that that was what healed me. Running is what hurt me. I had a really severe lower abdominal injury that lasted over a year, and it was chronic. And the only thing, I went to so many different specialists, and the only thing that helped me was yoga. And within a couple months, that chronic pain pretty much diminished, and it allowed me to get back to running. And I just wanted to ask you, from somebody who came from that background, like, did you feel it was being not emphasized enough, or like, what's your take on that? Alignment, yeah, alignment, proper technique.
I think that's being emphasized too much.
Too much. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and definitely it's being emphasized too much. I mean, that's my whole training, is how to de-emphasize that. I think that's where people are experiencing, again, I'm going to use air quotes, but injury, because I think they're trying to force certain outcomes without adequate enough introspection, I guess. Like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think yoga hurts people. So
yeah,
it's hard to, I did experience injury and pain through yoga, but it wasn't the yoga. I don't think yoga hurts people, even though people can hurt in yoga, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, just to kind of go off what you were just saying, where it's trying to fit into these, almost kind of like what you're saying is like, we're trying to fit into this alignment that might not be right for our bodies. And I think that was one of the kind of the points where it's not like it's not being taught. It's that we think we have to fit into this alignment. And a lot of times, I know back then when I was a runner, I wasn't the most flexible person. Back bends were near impossible for me. I mean, I could easily injure myself from doing a deep hamstring stretch and overstretching. So I really love how you put it that way, where it's not that it's not being emphasized enough, where it is almost too much, but it's maybe the message of all this is to really listen to your body and take it slow. And I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't love the listen to your body phrase.
Mm-hmm.
I don't dislike it. I actually reference it in my book, but I think that needs to be followed with some sort of metric of what are you listening to. I think that's kind of an important aspect. I just think I'm just surprised that you were always told that yoga is going to hurt you, because the people that I would hear the most about yoga and injury and hurting is from people who practice like yoga only for too long. You know, that's kind of where I hear it. So I'm surprised to have heard it from the athletic community, because they generally tend to, in my experience, just love it.
Yeah, I think it's getting more open-minded. It's just at the time, like a decade ago or so,
yeah,
like when I first got into running.
Yeah, that's just interesting. But I mean, if you look at yoga in the context of all the other activities that you do, it's a pretty low load, slow paced. There's not much you can do to injure yourself. You know, yeah, there's some end range stuff, but that's questionable. I think genetics has a play in that. It's an interesting discussion to have. And I have a position. I definitely have a position. I went into the research with the other position. Mm-hmm. I thought yoga was causing all kinds of injuries in people. But now I've kind of changed my mind on it. But I mean, again, just because I don't think that yoga can really cause injuries, because it's a pretty gentle, mild body weight activity, that doesn't mean that people don't hurt when they're doing it. And I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind, is that never should it hurt. And if you change a pose so much that it doesn't even look like the pose anymore, but you feel good in it, then that's the pose for you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really hard for new teachers to grasp, because then they feel like they don't have a point. Like, what's the point? If I'm not teaching them this like stick figure shape, you know, then why do they need me if they're allowed to do whatever they want? And so that's kind of I mean, that's my work. Like, that's what I spend all these hundreds of hours on Zoom calls with teachers and stuff, is helping people kind of reconcile that, that you're teaching them an experience. You're not teaching them the pose, and you're using the pose to help them interpret the experience. That would be the best way to say it.
Yeah, no, that's really well put. And I'm not trying to emphasize this point of that yoga is bad, because otherwise I wouldn't be making this podcast. I wouldn't want to
Of course, you love it.
spread the message. I think it's amazing,
Yep.
both physically and even more so mentally. And I just think that kind of getting past these stigmas and just learning from people that have kind of gone the path and learned the lessons, and that might be integrating the tools, like the tools that you teach, how to stay healthy if you that's all you practice, and something like that. And that kind of leads on to the next question, where is there anything that's particularly missing in the modern day yoga practice? I know, like in my own practice, I've added a lot of more of, I mean, just broad topics like internal rotation and a lot of like other strength exercises, where before I was becoming a runner, I was predominantly into strength, but then I would get so tight. Now I kind of have this combination, but I know if I just practice traditional, what people consider like, I guess, vinyasa yoga or hot yoga, or like the traditional yoga types, it's more flexibility based, even though you should be incorporating strength. But I just, what's your opinion on it? Anything that you would add into a modern day yoga practice that's not being
This is
emphasized?
a tough one. I think yoga is fine as it is. I don't, especially as a white woman, I don't really get to say that yoga isn't enough. It is perfect as it is. It is also not one thing. It also cannot be defined. What is it? It's something different to everybody else. So there's a problem in itself. I mean, it can be defined, but the way that we practice it here in the West is quite varied. So then, the next part of your question is, well, what is lacking? Well, I mean, what is lacking is people's expectation, I think, that yoga has to solve everything. So that's what's lacking. Yoga is perfect as it is. Like, that's it. But what do you have in your life? What are your goals? Not you personally, but anyone listening, like what other activities do you do? What's your mental health like? What's your, physiological health like? What's your sleep like? Are the practices of yoga that you're choosing to incorporate satisfying what you expect of it? And then maybe there are some bigger expectations and you do need to go outside of yoga, but that's not because the yoga is lacking. It's just yoga doesn't give you calcium. So you got to get that from somewhere if you need that. Do you know what I mean? Like that, so I think that's kind of my big position around yoga. Yoga is everything and perfect, but it's not everything. If you have specific goals, then you have to look at, is what you're doing satisfying that? And I think people forget that because yoga is just like so great and everybody gets so sucked into it. I did, I wanted yoga to fix my entire life. I wanted yoga to fix my grief and to make me strong and make me flexible. And, it isn't a thing. You're the yoga, it's your practice. So I wasn't utilizing my practice in a way that could do all of that. It's not even possible. So yeah, I think people just need to remember, like, you're a person, and yoga is just a part of your practice of being a human and living. It can't fix everything for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and a good point to emphasize. And by modern day yoga practice, I was just kind of referring, by definition, what would somebody off the street say? What is yoga? And kind of what they would think of it. They'd probably think of something like a vinyasa practice. But yoga is really, like you said, it's really anything. And at the same time, it could be something more so non-physical. I mean, we had a guest a couple episodes ago, Sarah Pilcher, and she had a student that was paralyzed and could only move their eyes. And you know what? They could still practice yoga. And what they need is different than what somebody else needs. And they already have somebody to work with them to stretch their body out, but they can't do it on their own. So what can they practice? And there's such a huge part of yoga that is meant for them. And like you said, it's whatever really fits into your practice. I guess to like the next part, just any tools, habits, routines that you've kind of used to, when you're overwhelmed by stress, like anything that's particularly you. I know we said it's very personal to the individual, but what are some non-negotiables in your own routine? Anything like people consider weird or something that you do?
I need to sit to be creative. I can't stand and be creative. What do I do to manage stress? The sun. The sun is I don't like cold. I live in a very hot state. I live in Nevada. I went for, it's probably 110 out. I went for a run this morning at, 9:30, and then I went for a walk at 1:30 in the middle of the day. Like most people would not do that. The sun is how I need to restore myself. I find I don't go running or walking in the winter because it's too cold. And it's not even cold here. But the outside doesn't have the same effect. So the sun for me, for sure. And my practice has really just changed. I mean, I love a vigorous practice, but I like nothing better than a 20-minute Shavasana, like that as a practice, just like lay down on the floor and just be. That's one of my favorite practices. And that was not me in my 20s, but now it's like, I keep pillows on you have a standing desk. I have a seated desk and pillows on the floor so I can just lay down anytime I want to. It's creative time down there.
Yeah, you sound like my girlfriend, who just happens to also be a yoga teacher for a while now. She loves Shavasana. She's just
yeah.
You want to meditate for 40 minutes and do Shavasana,
Yep,
and then
it's the best.
20 minutes Shavasana after class. And I'm like, no, I got to do another half an hour of strength or core or something. But it does, once you finally can relax, like that's, I think, my biggest thing. And I think that's why yoga resonated with me when I first started. It was all about the physical. I was just like, wow, this is great. I feel great. Strength, flexibility. Like I feel amazing. But then it's just like, wow, my mind's a little calmer. And it's calmer, not just before it was when I was running. I loved running because it's just when I ran, it was calm. And actually on the last episode, we talked to Mikkel Biker, and we kind of came to the conclusion, he taught us about breathing and meditation. And he's like, we kind of came to the conclusion that there's like 3 levels. It's like something that's physical, like an exercise. And then it goes into like a breathing, which is like a physical practice, but less physical, it's more subtle. And then it's like a meditative practice. And a lot of us kind of start and we get addicted to like more of the physical practice because we see the same benefits. And then as you kind of work down to more of the subtle practice, to the practice of meditation, which is really non-doing, then it's kind of, once you could cultivate that same feeling that you get while you're running or exercising, that's when you really like found your source. And that's kind of why yoga really resonated with me. And I guess for you, like any tips off the mat? I know you teach a lot about like biomechanics, but I know you probably also teach a lot about the kind of like the non-physical benefits of yoga. And any tips that you have for off the mat?
I'm not a big meditator in the sense that I don't have what looks like a formal practice. I think my meditation is shavasanas, walks. And then I think part of it is because I've just traveled so much for the last 10 years that my meditation is like getting on an airplane and just sitting there. So I think I meditate, but not in I don't carve out a time. I don't do it every morning. It's like, there's nothing I like more than after 3 days of talking to a room full of people, dropping off my stuff, getting on a plane and just sitting there. Just being so quiet and flying through space, I guess, so that's my I said, I have a different way of approaching it. I remember one time I sat next to a pilot and I was on a flight from Boston to Las Vegas. And when we got off the plane, the pilot turned to me and was like, I've never seen anybody sit so still for an entire flight. I wasn't sleeping. I was just sat there. He was like, I've seen anyone like in such a meditative state for like a 5-hour flight. I was like, oh yeah, it was great. I have to reflect on the weekend and clear my mind. And yeah, so it's a strange, I don't have I set my Calm app every morning before my coffee for 5 minutes. Like I don't do that,
Yeah. And I think that's a super thing, a great message to share. I mean, like we don't have to have these perfect routines, right? I mean, and like you said, what works for you doesn't work for me. Like I'm the complete opposite. I'm the guy in the aisle on the plane that can't sit still. I'm like, I constantly have to be moving. I'm like the Energizer bunny. Yeah. So that's really good to hear that it's just like, you know what, you don't have like sit down with your coffee and write 5 things you're grateful for. And like, we don't have to do that. There's whatever works for you. And
no, I think those are great
yeah.
tips for people that struggle just to like organically, find that. But yeah. And I guess my other one is not rushing out of bed in the morning. That's like, I know people that love to like get up and go, and I'll spend 2 hours in bed sometimes, just like reading the news, just kind of like, like just like, that's an important thing for me. If I have the luxury of that much time, not always, but like I'm awake. I don't set an alarm. I naturally wake up early, but I just don't start my day rushed. That's important to me. And then I guess the other thing is, this is a weird piece of trivia I've never told anyone on a podcast. I don't take showers. I take baths. If I check into a hotel that has a shower only, I'm devastated, because I only take baths. And that is highly meditative for me. Like, I have some of my best creative ideas in the tub. And I don't take like soak for a long time. Like I don't do like your classical, like Calgon take me away bath, I just turn on the water, get in, step into the warm water, because I like warm, rinse off, and just kind of, but I don't know, there's something very meditative about sitting in warm water that is a great way to start my day.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You'd hate my apartment. I don't have a bath. I only have a walk-in shower.
It's a requirement. It's a requirement for me.
Yeah, I'll tell maintenance. Now know the audience and what a secret yogi is. Is there any messages from the work you've been doing and the work you do that you'd like to share with the audience?
I mean, I would have to say, my big encouragement is critical thinking and scientific literacy, not just in relation to yoga, but in relation to consuming the news, especially right now during pandemic time, in relation to, political disagreements about how things should be handled, especially right now. I feel like every time someone comes to me outraged because one side is doing this, like, if you have just give it a little critical thinking, you can just be like, well, of course, this is what they stand for. And it's just easier to reconcile opposing positions. And it's not as easy to get, worked up about trivial stuff. I think, I don't know. It's a hard time. And I feel like my science studies have just prepared me for the world, I guess, and not because I am literate in statistics and, biology and chemistry, not that, but just the ability to go through the scientific process when hearing arguments, question the other side when one side is speaking up strongly, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely well put. Analytical mindset, and kind of use that analytical discretion. Somebody like yourself has a science background. And Jules, where can more people find out about what you're working on? I know your website, julesmitchell.com. You have Instagram at Jules Mitchell. Your book.
At Jules Yoga. It's at Jules Yoga. There's Jules a poor Yoga. At Jules Mitchell out there that gets tagged all the time instead of me. So
yeah, I had written down Jules Yoga, but it was so everyone listening, it's at Jules Yoga.
I'm sure she doesn't mind. She gets all kinds of interesting tags, but yeah, it's funny. Happens all the time. I'm like, a friend of mine will post and they're like, wrong tag, and they're like, oh. It's funny.
Your book you could find really anywhere. It's on Amazon. Yoga Biomechanics, Stretching Redefined. I'll have a link below to all this, and of course the show notes. Are you still doing your Science of Stretching webinar? I know I am.
I have one July 22nd.
Okay.
I do that every July and January.
Great. And you have, of course, all your other.
Yeah, I've got all kinds of, I've got pre-recorded content. I've got a book club if you want assistance going through, not other people's books, this book, my book. It's a dense book, so people who want assistance going through it, we read a chapter a week and I answer questions in a webinar format. And that's been really wildly successful and popular. So yeah.
Awesome.
I've got
you have all your other evergreen programs. And who would you say these programs particularly for? Like if somebody was saying like, I don't know if
they're
this is
for teachers.
for teachers?
They're for
Okay.
teachers.
So
I mean,
somebody who's
that's
serious
my,
into.
I spend all my time teaching teachers. I'm planning to teach some recorded classes and launch those because I haven't taught a public class since 2015. I mean, I teach classes and trainings and stuff like that, but I haven't taught a public class since 2015. And now that we're all locked down and I don't have planes to be on, at some point when I get over a few hurdles, I'll probably record some classes and make those available to the public. So that will be on my website
Okay,
when the time
great.
comes. And
And
I
for
do teach on Udaya if people are interested in taking my class. That's a website that I have like over 100 classes on.
great. Yeah. And for everyone listening, if you really are into yoga and want to take it to the next level and really geeking out over everything, this is a great opportunity to check out some of your
Yeah.
courses. So if you really want to take yoga to the next level, thanks, Jules, so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you all so much for being here. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'm truly grateful for your time and all that who have taken part in the Secret Yogi Society to make life beautiful through bringing together a community of like-minded individuals to go through life's journey together. I appreciate you all who have left a rating and review and wherever you've listened to this episode right now. So if you haven't left a rating or review thus far, if you can please do so. Your reviews help push this show further and in turn directly support all those who have joined the Secret Yogi Society. For more information on the Secret Yogi Society, check out our website, www.secretyogisociety.com. From there, you'll find links to our Facebook group where we are constantly supporting each other as a community and discussing the latest episodes. Our Instagram, where we have short, thoughtful quotes and reflections from recent guests. And finally, feel free to join our mailing list for upcoming events, free yoga, and meditation classes. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and namaste.